I would like to welcome everyone out to our West Side Planning Committee meeting and thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to meet with us to discuss these important topics. It is just after 5 p.m. on Tuesday, November 29th, 2016 in the city conference room, and we are meeting as the West Side Planning Committee. Remind everyone that we are being recorded, so watch your words. And we will begin with a roll call. Start with Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Vanderwerken, Executive Assistant, Council Office.
Gary Winterton.
Beth Allen.
Terry Herbert.
Shannon Ellsworth.
Bill Holterstrom.
Chris Strachan. David Harding. David Day.
LaDonna Christensen.
Sarah McNamara.
Dave Knack.
Mark Wheeler.
Bob Springmeyer.
Peter Mattson, Ovation Homes.
Diana Taylor, Resident.
Leanne Griffey.
Abigail Martin.
Robert Mills.
Scott Henderson.
Greg Beckstrom.
Dixon Homes.
Thank you very much. Today's agenda is a little lighter. We will have a presentation on the floodplain and dikes in the area. We will have a presentation from the Provo School District, and then we will jump back into policy decisions for going forward. So we'll turn the time over to Greg with the floodplains and dikes.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Talk about floodplains and dikes. I'm going to start with a presentation talking about the history of the dikes, levees, a little bit of the drainage on the west side of Provo, and then I'll be followed by Robert Mills, who will talk about the implications of that in terms of the flood insurance program and the implications that may have in terms of development. I've had the opportunity to work for Provo City in various positions since before the floods of the 80s. And so it seems like during these last several decades, drainage has been a key aspect of development policy on the west side. And over the years, either the flooding issues have created expenses that have made development not cost effective, or sometimes we haven't addressed the issues of drainage as part of development. We've suffered some of the consequences of that, and I think most of us are familiar with both of those situations. I had the opportunity through much of my career to serve under the tutelage of Terry Herbert, so if I get out of line or say anything incorrect, he'll be able to provide perspective and correction. Getting into it, we talk about dikes and levees. For all practical purposes, those things mean the same thing, so they're words that can be used interchangeably. They have two general purposes. In Provo, this map has brown lines which define where the dikes, levees are. We have them along the river, and then we have them along the lake shore. They serve slightly different purposes. Both require pumps, which are fairly expensive to purchase, to install, and to operate, but they're required if levees are going to be effective. From a policy standpoint, these ultimately come down to risk management decisions. There are two extremes in policy. You can simply choose to avoid all possible risk and not do any kind of development, or you can choose to be optimistic about the potential risks and do development, largely ignoring the risks, and deal with the consequences when they come to pass. For the most part, I think most of us feel it's probably prudent to find some policy in between those two extremes, but that involves some fairly conscious decisions regarding the trade-offs between the two. We have the dikes along the river, which we won't spend a lot of time talking about. They were originally built by landowners, farmers. To the best of our knowledge, they were built, for the most part, at least before the 50s. We know they were there in the 50s. They were probably built in the 40s, maybe the 30s or earlier. They were upgraded periodically over time. The most recent significant modification of the dikes along the river was in the 80s, in which they were raised and enlarged in cooperation with the Corps of Engineers in anticipation of heavy flows that we had at that point in time. The river essentially has a capacity of about 23 or 2,400 CFS, which is what we experienced in the 80s. We have experienced up to 2,000 CFS in the river a few times since then, and it's largely a management effort, but for the most part, that's not been a significant issue with development in the west side. We will note that there are some differences in the risk associated with failure. A failure of the river levee tends to be more potentially catastrophic. We have high flows in the river normally for a period of weeks associated with a heavy spring runoff. A failure of a levee on the south side of the Provo River would be potentially very catastrophic because the topography flows away from the river. And if we had a failure in the levee here, there would be significant potential for flooding on the west side. A failure on the north side would not be quite as catastrophic. There would certainly be potentially significant damage to the area immediately north of the river, but given the topography has that southwesterly direction, the water would tend to hug the river channel and eventually probably get back into it. The lake levees come kind of in two categories. There's a levee that was built with the airport, and originally it was built all the way around the airport. You literally drove across the levee to get into the airport. The elevation of the airport is essentially at the compromised elevation or normal elevation of Utah Lake. Normal elevation of Utah Lake is 4489. The elevation of the airport for the most part is about 4490. And so any significant elevation of the lake, which occurs routinely during the spring part of the year, puts the lake underwater, or excuse me, would put the airport underwater were it not for the moat, dike, and pumping system that keeps the airport dry, pretty much irrespective of what the lake elevation is. And those levees, to the best of our knowledge, were built with the airport, which I believe was in the early 40s. Is when the airport was constructed. I suspect that had it not been for the fact that in the 30s there was a significant dry period and the lake was probably about where it is today, which is probably a half mile or a mile away from the edge of the airport, it might have been built either at a different location or they might have considered building it further inland. But it has largely been a successful operation. Additional levees in this area here, and in this Lakewood area here, and were built. They didn't pre-exist. They were built during the 80s. At the same time, most of the other levees were raised and enlarged. Over the course of time, there have been some modifications in terms of how we handle drainage. This is the boundary of the airport. This area now also drains and is benefited and served by the airport moat dike and pumping system. This line here, and I've got some copies of these maps that will be available. This dashed line here represents the elevation of 4495. That is the elevation, or that was the lake shore, or where there were no dikes in the 80s, i.e. this entire area on the north side of the river was underwater, and this was the edge of the lake in southwest Provo during the mid-80s. And all of this area would have been underwater, as well as the southern portion of the Lakewood subdivision area, had these dikes not been constructed and been serviced by pumps in the 80s. Sir?
So you have the dikes down by Lakewood and over by the airport, nothing in between. Is that because there was no need to protect homes? It was just farmland at that point?
That's essentially correct. And that was because the construction of these levees in the 80s were funded by significantly by the federal government, and and they did not value the protection of farmland the same way they valued residences and other development. So that was a decision that was made at the time. In the meantime, we have established a development policy that basically requires all new streets in this area of the community to be built at a minimum elevation of 4495, which is the lake elevation, and a minimum elevation for any residential homes, any residential living of any kind, of 4496, which provides a minimum of a foot of freeboard. That's an absolute minimum. There are certainly areas where even those are not necessarily adequate, but that is the baseline minimum elevation for road and residential construction. That does not apply at the airport. Obviously, of course, we don't allow any residential development in the airport area, but development in the airport just simply has to be built at the elevation, essentially, of the runways. Airplanes do very poorly trying to go uphill and downhill, except when they're in the air. And so that dictates that development. But that is a risk that is essentially taken in that area that thus far, as a matter of public policy, the city has chosen not to take with residential development. There have been questions regarding Lakeview Parkway and its potential functionality as a dike to protect future development in southwest Provo. Largely for environmental reasons, Lakeview Parkway is not built as a dike and could never be certified as a dike for purposes of flood protection, and the implications of that we'll get into with Mr. Mills' discussion relative to flood insurance. From a practical standpoint, over the course of time, it will provide some flood control benefits to that area of the community, but they'll need to be supplemented with pumps, and it's potential that if the lake ever got to the elevation that it did in the 80s, that there would need to be some additional enhancements that would need to be done. The minimum elevation of Lakeview Parkway is 4497, so it's essentially 2 feet above where the flood elevation was in the 80s, but it would be a lake levee, and that 2 feet does not provide adequate protection for wave action and the freeboard that's associated with those sorts of activities. So if we did have a repeat of that scenario, even though it would be helpful, there would be some additional enhancements and obviously pumping that would need to be done. We've noted on here areas where there are drain lines that pass through Lakeview Parkway. We anticipate that simultaneously with development in those areas, the city would need to acquire property that would service as locations for future pump facilities to provide flood control protection. And those pump facilities may be of a temporary or permanent nature, and those decisions could be made down the road, but we want to make sure as a matter of policy that we acquire the land that provides the ability for the city to make those improvements at some point down the road. So in summary, and I promised Cliff that I would get through my portion of the presentation in 10 minutes. I hope I've met that objective. There are basically 2 things that we can say with certainty. Someday high water will return. We saw water this low in the 70s. We saw historic floods in the 80s. We saw water elevation this low in the 90s. We had water that was 2.5, 3 feet above normal up in the 44, 91, 92 range just 5 years ago in 2011. The lake fluctuates. Global warming or no global warming, the lake will fluctuate. We will see high water again at some point in the future. It's purely a question of when, not if. And basically the public policy that the city makes will determine how we balance those trade-offs between risk and the desire to develop that property, and to what extent we're proactive or to what extent we choose to be reactive. The reactive approach created some fairly expensive after-the-fact improvements that were required to protect Lakewood during the 80s, as well as provide protections for the Riverview subdivision in the area. We always learn from experience. The experience of the Riverview subdivision was we don't want to build basements in this part of town. And so we strive very ardently not to do that anymore. So you want to answer questions now, or should we have Mr. Mills make his presentation and then get into the questions? I'm fine. Either way, go ahead.
Well, I've got 1.5 minute one. I don't want to use up all your time. I'll take 2 minutes, but I know you're in a hurry. But we're talking about the flooding in that area. The dikes will go at the elevation of 4497 on the lakefront. And as you recall, some years later, we had FEMA come down and look at this area and spend 2 weeks down here and do a study. And they were looking at the southwest part of town. And when we had the opportunity, we got invited to go back to FEMA and do a scenario or a presentation. When we got back there, the first thing the guy said that was here from FEMA, he said, let me make 3 recommendations. He said, when you're in the southwest part of town and you have an earthquake or something, he said, 1 is have an evacuation plan. Number 2 is know where your family is. Number 3 is pack your bags and move to Arizona. Because of the liquefaction in that area, everything will just sink. And so that's why we're a little reluctant to recognize building in that flood area.
Quick question. I'm hearing, I've heard different urban legends that development over here can affect the water table over there. If someone builds a bigger house over here, does it affect the water table over there, or is that, that's confusing to me, that whole idea, but I've heard urban legend like that.
Groundwater is extremely complicated. It is very difficult to establish cause and effect. There are obviously some significant factors that are associated with cause and effect, but the fact of the matter is, if you look in a subdivision, even in Lakewood, we have homes that pump, we have homes that don't. And they can be very close to each other, and they can have basements at the same elevation. We experience the same thing in Riverview, we experience the same thing in different areas of town. Having said that, there is very little scientific basis that would support that hypothesis that the construction of home on one property or any building on a particular property is going to have any impact on the groundwater elevation on neighboring property. The most that could be said is there may be some very short-term impacts, but in the long term, and those would be on the order of inches for a period of weeks or months, not on the order of feet or for extended periods of time. So we've seen nothing that would suggest anything otherwise.
Thank you.
Greg, what impact would Jordanelle have on flooding now that would have, had it been in place in '83, would there have been any, or?
The primary benefit of Jordanelle is that it does provide the ability to reduce flows in the Provo River. In the overall scheme of things, and this would be another 10-minute discussion, it had very little impact on lake elevation. The volume of storage in Jordanelle would not be able to impact have a significant impact on the elevation of Utah Lake, but it would benefit us in reducing potential flood flows quantities in the river.
So over on that previous map, down in Lakewood, you showed a dike.
Right.
And what assurance does the neighborhood have that it's going to stay in place? Some of it's privately owned. Some people think maybe they can remove it. What's the legal situation?
Many of these levees that were built in the 80s are on private property, but the city does have an easement for those easements. So basically, the guarantee that these dikes will remain to provide that protection to the community is essentially the good faith and wisdom of Provo City.
So we do have an easement.
Yes.
Greg, they talked about Jordanelle. How about going north through this Jordan River and up into Salt Lake? Have they learned anything from '83 to improve, to help us control the lake even more?
In the meantime, they have done a couple of things. One which has helped, and that is they have increased the capacity of the Jordan River between Utah Lake through the point of the mountain, and that does help again with the quantities of water leaving the river, but they've also adopted a policy to help minimize flooding in the Jordan River down in the area of Salt Lake City and South Salt Lake City and some West Valley, some of those communities, that actually limits the amount of flows that could go down there. That gets to be a complicated discussion, but the bottom line is, again, it provides some benefit, but it would be on the order of inches in the elevation of Utah Lake in any given season, not a difference of feet.
Greg, one more short one, when you're talking about the flood water. The worst case scenario, they told us if Jordanelle were to break during the earthquake and Deer Creek were to break during an earthquake, if you look at the flood inundation maps, it shows the Lakewood area would have 3 to 4 inches of water if both of those were to break in an extreme situation. So I hear people say, yeah, we were told it would be under 3 or 4 feet of water. Well, that's
Feet or inches?
or
Feet or inches?
inches.
Yeah, the story's not the same for the river bottoms in that catastrophic situation. But by the time that water does get to the west side, get to the area of the freeway, we are talking about depths that are largely less than a foot.
The MS4 outfalls, are those culverts?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Beckstrom. Do you speak the language? Mr. Middles.
Okay, thank you. I will be very brief. The map that you have in front of you is the same one as up here. This is the flood zones as delineated on the FIRM map, which is the federal flood insurance rate maps produced by FEMA. The one for Provo was produced in the late 80s, and so this is the information that we have currently. Just to explain this a little bit, the areas that you see in green that are hatched, that's commonly referred to as the 500-year flood. That doesn't necessarily mean that once every 500 years it only floods. That's every year there's a 0.02% chance that it will flood that year at that elevation. The blue area is commonly referred to as the flood hazard area, or the Zone A or Zone AE, or the 100-year flood, or the 1% chance flood. So this area is commonly what you call the floodplain. And what this means is that in this area, every year there's a 1% chance that there would be a flood that would reach those base flood elevations. For any areas that are in this blue area, FEMA's recommendation is that you shouldn't develop there. However, development is possible, and it happens all the time. It just has to be closely regulated through through flood permits and also through elevation certificates to make sure that any development in those areas will be protected and that there won't be any, catastrophic events and things like that. Currently, the levee system for Provo is being reevaluated. This is an ongoing study that's being done by in conjunction with several different agencies, including FEMA, including the state, and it's being done by some private consultants, and this is called the Levee Analysis Mapping Project. And one of the outcomes of that project is to just see exactly what the floodplain is going to look like now versus when it was initially mapped. Floodplains can change over time. I appreciated your question about whether groundwater changes. Groundwater doesn't necessarily change as far as I know. However, the floodplain can change, and development within that floodplain has to be regulated so it doesn't change the floodplain further upstream. So that's why we want it to be very well regulated and very well documented. So with those changes, there is the anticipation that this map will be changing. Cliff, would you mind showing that other PDF? This is, this next PDF that I'm going to show, come in here. Hold on.
Those are both the
Is
stars.
that on the first chart?
Come here. This one. That one? Uh-huh. Okay. Can you go and turn it like that? Sorry. There we go. Oh, no. Is it upside down? One more.
We'll just go in a circle here.
Okay, thank you. This is in very, very draft form. Nothing has been finalized yet, and this is an ongoing process that will take several more months, possibly years. But one of the preliminary maps that we have been shown on one of the scenarios of the flood mapping is this area could become Zone AE, or which means the 1% flood area. The 1% flood area is the area that generally requires flood insurance. The green area that you see on your map, even though it's considered a 500-year flood area, customarily does not require flood insurance. And so there is the anticipation that our flood map can change, and that additional people within our community would require flood insurance on their homes. That's something that we don't know exactly what this map is going to look like, but it's something that we can plan for, especially through our policy, that would maybe lessen the impact of some of those costs on these people. And so over the next few months and things like that, we'll be looking at different policies that we could maybe change and implement into our ordinance that would bring the cost of flood insurance down for those individuals. But that's basically all I have. Don't quote me or don't take a picture of this one yet, but it'll probably change.
Two questions. One, this map seems to respect the levees. That, hey, the levees here, therefore, it's, you know, the area just beyond it isn't in the 100-year floodplain. This one, do we know if it takes that into consideration, or is ignoring it for the time being?
So one outcome of this study is that FEMA does not recognize our levees for flood protection.
Okay. And then the second thing you talked about,
Even though they will probably offer a great deal of protection from a flood insurance point of view, they do not recognize them.
would that affect rates? Flood insurance rates?
For the absence of the levy, or if they did consider them.
Because the levies are there, even though they still draw these colors, does having the levy there affect the flood insurance rates that people would pay, the premiums that they would pay if they're on?
Unfortunately, it does not.
Okay. And then second, you said that there may be some policies that we can put into place that will, I mean, just very roughly, what kind of policies?
For example, Greg was talking about how we have freeboard, or the elevation at which a structure is constructed to be above the flood elevation. If we have policies that require additional freeboard, that has a positive effect on the insurance premiums that people would pay. So those are some examples, and over time we'll be able to explore what exactly would be feasible as far as cost to construct versus cost savings as far as insurance and things like that.
Thank you.
So the cost to construct might be partly bringing in a whole bunch more fill to raise it.
Correct. Or piers, and there are different construction methods that could be used, but fill is the primary one. And so how much does it cost to construct to that standard versus the insurance cost?
So if we build houseboats.
If we build houseboats, I think we're good.
You mentioned the policies. Does the city already have some of those policies in place for some areas?
The city does have a flood ordinance. Any other questions?
One quick one. How many households are currently paying flood insurance on the west side?
So most likely, any home that would be in your blue area, if there were structures in that area that they would be in, you can see that the vast majority are not in that area. I think some of the areas up in the river woods and things like that, some of those homes are actually within the floodplain area, but.
So the blue area on the south part of the map, and then, even though we can't hold you to it, that other map shows it getting bigger and including this plus more.
Correct.
The key differences are that in the blue area now and in the blue area in the future, you will be required, if you have a federally insured mortgage, to purchase flood insurance. In the green area, you have the option of purchasing flood insurance, but you're not obligated to, and you have a better rate than if you're in the blue area. So the significant difference of the changes that are coming are there will be much more property in which you will be required to purchase flood insurance to get a federally insured mortgage.
Thankfully, prior to any of those changes, these people would be able to purchase flood insurance at a grandfathered rate, and it would be significantly cheaper.
How much is insurance, flood insurance per thousand? Is there a,
Off the top of my head.
don't know.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much, Robert. Appreciate your expertise on this. And we will now turn the time over to Mark Wheeler to discuss how potential future development of West Provo will affect our school district.
Thank you. Can you go to the other file real quick, and then we'll go to that
This
one
one
next.
first?
No,
I think those are the only two we loaded in, Mark. Thought I only had the two.
sorry, go back. It's the other, there was one other one.
Okay.
You guys watch carefully, you can see where we hide it in there.
Right there.
Ellen?
Yes. There it is, thank you. My name is Mark Wheeler, I'm Director of Facilities for Provo School District. Thank you for inviting us. I'm just going to share a couple of things about just some general areas that we're looking at as a school district on an ongoing basis. And then also just, I want to introduce Bob Springmeyer, he's Chairman of Bonneville Research, here on my right. Bob has been very helpful. The school district since late 2012. He helped us prepare for the 2014 bond, and he helps us continue to adjust data as needed for demographic information and coordinates a lot with the city. Just real quick, just an update on our Provo High School campus. It's about 1200 North Lakeshore Drive. Our Lakeview Elementary sits about over in this area. We sit on about 42 acres. Our campus, just for comparison, University is 25 acres. Most school districts throughout the state, if they can, are buying 60-acre parcels for 4A high schools. So we're thrilled to go from the 25 to the 42 for some extra space. And as you can see, these are the proposed concepts for new roads, road access around our campus. Provo City Engineering and Planning has been very, very helpful to the school district through this process. This new road will veer off of Lakeshore Drive, eventually connect to the Parkway. And if you've been out there recently, you can see the subgrade prep for 1280 North. Ivory Homes is just to our north here with their development. There's an LDS Chapel site right there in that area. Can you go to the next one, Cliff? And this is just one of our more recent concepts for Provo High School. We've adjusted a couple of things here with athletic fields, the way those lay out, and with coordination with city engineering, our south parking lot has expanded at this point to coordinate with this new road that'll come off and head southwest towards the parkway. But this is the general idea. We'll have 3 academic wings, 3-story wings. The shop areas will be here on the north, and it'll be a great campus for the Provo High School neighborhoods. Can you go to the next one, please? Our concern and our view for the future is of course the northwest corner of Provo and the southwest corner based on demographic information. In this southwest area, you can see this is our old Sunset View Elementary. It now faces south here. We're always watching growth and activity here in this area. At some point, and please don't quote me on this because it's always a work in progress, we always need to be mindful of a new home for Dixon Middle School at some point. Just to give you a little couple details about Dixon, it sits on 8 acres. State guidelines recommends that any middle school sit on 15 to 18 acres. So it's a very, very small site, and Dixon sits in a high growth area with southwest growth and feeds into Provo High School, of course. So we're always watching for anywhere in this southwest region for some point a future home for Dixon. Can you go to the next one, Cliff? And then, of course, in the northwest area, you've already seen, here's our Lakeview Elementary on 1390 North. Geneva Road is right here. And, of course, our Provo High campus sits in this area. With the growth that continues to be pushed south from the Vineyard area and from Alpine District, we're always watching this very northwest corner of the city and of Provo District, because we know at some point we will need another elementary school. It's something we're constantly looking for to make sure we plan for the future. And then if you can go to the fourth slide, past school boards have done a good job watching for potential growth areas. Our Amelia Earhart Elementary, for example, they did a very good job. Here's Center Street. I think this is about 2650 West. Amelia sits here on the very north corner of this parcel. The school district owns this parcel, which is 5. This entire parcel is 10. So to help accommodate future growth in that southwest area, at least in the Amelia neighborhoods, we have probably under 10 acres that's already owned by the school district to help expand if needed. Yes?
So, can't remember, do you have an agreement with the LDS Church to use the parking lot?
Yes, they've been very kind to us over the years. Yes.
Do you expect that to continue?
We hope. We hope so. So far, it continues to go well. There's been some recent discussion about maybe taking this 5 acres here directly west of the church parking lot and maybe creating some parking there until we expand at some point in Amelia. Any other questions about those? Just really general 4 simple slides just to kind of give you an idea of what we're watching in the west part of Provo. But our concern is northwest and southwest.
Do your current plans then accommodate are you anticipating what the city's already set up as build out for that area, or does that require new schools when we get there?
I'm going to let Bob answer that question because he can explain to you how we've approached that and how we watch that process. Yeah, good question though. Any other questions for me? Thank you very much, Bob.
Thanks, Mark.
Let's go to that PowerPoint. Again, I'm Bob Springmeyer, and my firm's Barlow Research. I'm particularly glad to see Brian Maxfield here. Brian's been a big help in the work that we did on this. Basically, when Mark called me this afternoon and said there was a question coming out about, are there rule of thumb type of standards that are helpful in determining the number of rooftops, houses, that then would require a new elementary school, a new middle school, or a new high school. And my answer to Mark was, yes, there are, but they're really useful when you're looking at a 10,000 foot level. The work that we did really looked more specifically at the amount of undeveloped land that was still available for possible residential housing, and then looked at, through working with the city planning department, both what kind of density would likely be developed on that property, and then looking at the number of families and how big those families would be, and therefore how old and how many children there would be, and then looked at what that absorption period is, how long it would take for those houses to be built. And what we did, in working with Brian and the city, it looked like there was a little over 740 acres of developable land in that west side area. Currently planned that there would be 3 units per acre on those, so the math isn't hard. And then you get an average of about 3.24 residents per housing unit. Then you have to look at what the absorption would be, and as I remember, we were looking at probably a 25-year absorption on that. And yeah, that's the next slide. 20 to 25 years. And then, so then you see the math, which really isn't all that difficult. Then the question comes up with the experience. Normally, when you get a new residential development, you typically get new young families moving in. And I think we've all experienced that wave of children, that you're doing a catch-up on an elementary school, then you're doing a catch-up on a middle school, then you're doing a catch-up in the high school, but meanwhile, that elementary school, the population is starting to decline. We've actually recommended in many cases, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that we ought to build our first elementary schools with all of the temporary classrooms that you can fit reasonably around. Now, school boards are really reluctant to do that because they'll be criticized for poor planning, not anticipating. But what they're really doing is anticipating that you're going to get these bubbles going through, and instead of building brick and mortar permanent facilities to handle those initial bubbles, you're building anticipating what a level, consistent, renewable population is going to be and how old those students are. You know, I was born 1943, just barely before the baby boom hit. And I can remember we were always out of schools, clouded, doubling up on classrooms. And I think most of you have all experienced the same thing as you've moved into new residential development areas. So in working with Provo School District, this is how we came at our projections of enrollment, looking at how these new areas are going to be developed, looking at how dense, how big the families are likely to be, and then looking at detailed census information, trying to make some reasonably good guesses about the ages, and then how those ages then flow through the system. And that's how we did the projections then for all of the school district, both for the early bonding as well as some relooks we've done at some of them. Now the district does an excellent job of managing their schools, and that they have what I call magnet programs that they use to attract people that are not residents within that particular school boundaries, but help keep those schools full and active and utilizing all their facilities. So these are the numbers that we came up with in our projections for the west side. think that's the last of the slides, yes. So happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Those are the number of students.
I'm sorry.
Those are the number of students.
These would be the number of students and within each of the age groups there. Please.
Why did you separate it, 5th through 8th, rather than say 7th and 8th grades for that middle group?
Sometimes the census doesn't categorize ages the same as you find with school districts categorizing. So that was about as close as we could get to matching.
Thank you.
Please.
So this is the number of new students or the total students on the west side?
And I think this would be the number of new students that would come as a result of a phased development of the undeveloped areas.
Through about 2025, correct?
And how many students are there currently on the west side?
I'm not sure I have that information.
I don't have that total count, but I can get it for you.
But that represents about 5 to 7 classrooms worth of kids.
And the number you used for your projection was 3 units per acre?
I'm sorry, was what?
The 3 units per acre is what you used for your projections here?
The 3
units per acre?
3 units per acre, that's correct.
What's been floated around here was 4 units per acre, so.
Yeah, there's some differences because of some areas that were planned out in the current scenarios that only the areas could go to 4 units per acre that weren't already planned out. And so in the other calculation, we've kind of taken that back off the board to look at some other situations. So you'll notice some differences in numbers, but it's just because of what you include and don't include.
If you're choosing 3 units per acre or 4 units per acre, does that really have an impact on the number of students? If you get them more crowded, are the families going to be moving to a different place, or you go 3 units per acre, are they going to be more stable? Or
Obviously, if you're going to 4 units per acre, you're going to 6 units per acre, you're getting much more density, and you're getting that many more families, and you're getting that many more students.
So you're actually getting more students. The students, you're not seeing smaller acreage getting more kids that are going to be in the area. If you get more density, sometimes those units are smaller without children. And so I was wondering if you saw any correlation between those.
We normally don't. In fact, you could probably argue it goes the other way. If you're putting 4 units per acre, then the amount of acreage, the cost of the acreage is going to be reduced. Therefore, the overall cost of the home is likely going to be a little bit less. And therefore, more younger families can qualify to buy those homes.
So they will affect the younger grades, but maybe not the older, and maybe a detrimental effect to the older grades.
And normally, you don't see older families, established families, buying into these type of new developments. Didn't anticipate this being an empty nester development.
I was going to make a comment somewhat related, but we have actually seen proposals for independent living communities here. So some of that may be here, and we've thrown around this idea of a diversity of housing types, and I think that has the potential to help reduce, it won't eliminate, but help reduce that kind of bubble of population that moves through the schools by offering housing types that will attract different types of families as well.
And I think there's a lot of wisdom in doing that. And I think it also helps make a more stable population as we talk about these bubbles going through.
To give you a comparison as well, I mentioned Amelia Earhart, that we've got the acreage to expand there and absorb some of that growth. To give you some enrollment examples, we could add about 300 more students at Amelia, and that would be about where our Westridge Elementary is now at about 900 students, and our Wasatch Elementary is about 900 plus.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank you.
the presentation. And at this time, we will move to Austin Corey.
risk of being run out with pitchforks, I figure all these old guys using technology, we're going to take a step back into the past.
Do you want the light?
Thanks. So I wanted to begin a little bit today by explaining in planning what we do with a planning effort like this. Oftentimes we follow a typical approach, and so I wanted to point out to you what we see as kind of the direction and the efforts, where the efforts can be focused right now. On the right hand, your right hand side here, usually we go through a level of steps similar to this. We review the background, which is similar to the presentations that you've been given so far by the school district and so forth, trying to understand what's going on in the area. We also analyze existing policies. What kind of plans already exist, and what are the policies that they say? You can see in this list I've checked both of those off. Because I think for this committee, you've been through that kind of level of review and detail so far. So that puts us at the crux right now that we're at is determining future policy. So that can include utilizing existing policies, deciding that they're accurate the way that they're written and that they'll continue and be maintained. It can be deciding to remove policies because they no longer apply. It can be writing completely new policy. So it can incorporate quite a vast array of different things. But that's really where I see this group at right now, for as far as I've been involved. But what that does in the planning process, what it helps us do is it then sets things up to where a draft plan can start to be drafted. We generally do it section by section, focusing on different parts and reviewing each thing, making sure that it's actually following those policies that have been established throughout the process. And by the end of that, we come up with the final draft version. From that point, this committee would review that draft and make further recommendations and comments and so forth. The draft would go out to the citizens for review and comment, and then it would be analyzed for possible revisions. Once that draft form has come to basically what actually looks like a plan, you don't really see a plan until you're all the way down here, but it's kind of happening the whole time you're discussing things. Once it comes to that, it goes to the Planning Commission, and they make further recommendation. You can see the bar I put to the side there. All of these different committees and citizen input and even the Planning Commission are simply making recommendations through this plan. Ultimately, to end up at the City Council, where the actual policy is determined, either adopted as recommended, or the council, as we have some council members here with us, are able to make changes on the fly, even in the meeting if they decide. But ultimately, the actual policy is written and adopted by the council in this regard. So I wanted to give you this as an outline of how things go in the process and why, if you remember, last week I mentioned we've been asked to kind of put together some maps and have some discussion. And there were 3 specific questions that I raised, and I hope that all of you have been racking your brains about them all week. But the purpose of those questions was to try and answer this. What is the policy that's going to start driving us and start getting us to a stage where we can actually draft portions of the plan? So I reiterated those questions here, and we've added a couple others. In the time we have, I would be very surprised if you would come up to with answers of all of them, but if you do, that would be excellent. But with this as the background of why we're asking these questions and what we're looking to resolve, I would propose to you that we start going through these questions. And as a committee, I would love to see what kind of answers we can come up with and policy direction that this committee feels the plan should include. Is that fair enough?
So, I think those are important questions. And the way I'm looking at the maps, we have the different scenarios that were produced, and I even have the ones from 2 years ago that are still a different flavor. If you picked a map and said, that's the map I like, then you'd have to form policy to make it happen, because our policy may not be quite in place to make that happen. Or you can answer those questions and then decide, based on those questions, we're going to go out and make a map. So it's kind of one or the other.
Dave, I like what you're saying there. And to me, the latter makes more logical sense. One of the struggles I'm having this whole process, if I can just add on to that, is that the circle of governance of big picture, big vision on the outside, and color the paper clips and color how high the tall grass is on the bottom. It seems to me that if the easiest place for us to discuss is in the middle, because we have stronger opinions on that. I mean, if you ask me, do I like that color house, this kind of house, I have a strong opinion. But it's the wrong way for us to plan, as you're describing, that go on the outset of that, start at the higher picture of the vision and value. That's how we build consensus. And so I think we need to be pulling further out, as you just described, and not put things where they are on the map, but say, here's what I would like my neighborhood to be like, our neighborhood, our community to be like. To me, is a much better direction than trying to say, I want on this corner this or that, or I don't want a neighbor to build this or that. So I like us pulling way out with these broad questions and letting the experts propose what map to use.
And even though I think that's valuable to do that, at the same time, I think it's important to listen to the residents who live there. And we went online and invited people to literally put those things on the map. And frankly, if we didn't want to listen and incorporate their feedback, we shouldn't have done it.
And I guess I think we need to understand, as I'm trying to understand the big picture, I've just been on a lot of bud governance training around the country, and we start getting arguing about what color something should be or this or that. And we usually run into conflicts because we don't have the higher value. So I think we can learn from those maps about the intent of what people want, but not necessarily expect every resident to be turned into a planner. Because if you ask me an opinion about what I like, I'll give you my opinion, though I realize there are 10 people in the room who are actually a lot smarter on this. So I think it's a balancing act for us.
Balance.
It's a balancing act, but I would love to have us let the planners say, what did they learn by seeing this map that you described? And saying, oh, it looks like they really want some of this and some of that, rather than saying, I want it right here. Because that sounds really inefficient and not taking advantage of better science and research.
Wouldn't that survey information inform those questions?
In theory, yes. And so, what did we get back from the public? Because that closed. We do have the results, but how do we get those results before us so we can better discuss this?
I'm hoping that the expert planners can synthesize that and say, gee, what I've seen is a real consensus that we want these elements.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's showing where the interests are.
Yeah.
It's telling what people kind of see as a priority to them in an area. And so it gives you things to address. It's not so much coming up with a final conclusion yet, but it's saying, okay, there's enough interest here, we really need to look at that and address it. It may not turn out the same way, but a lot of these people are making marks without any understanding of parameters. And that's the downside of it. You know, for instance, the grocery store. Do they understand the grocery store would require so many rooftops? And if so, where do those go? Because we had some in there that want a grocery store with ag protection with no more residential. And you're going, okay, you can't have the grocery store then. You know, and so some of it, you've got to refine it. That's certainly not the end of public input. You know, that's the start, a very initial feel.
The irony is we usually have stronger opinions closer to the center of that circle, which is where the decisions are not well made, but we have stronger opinions on that. And so we've got to find out how to pull that back out of that, because it's almost like what you want for Christmas.
Okay, so this is my thing. What kind of open space do I want to see? One, south of the parkway, natural land. Farming, if that's what people own over there. Other, I think a third of the remaining acreage should be open space. I'm talking about a regional sports park, parks and trails that people seem to really want, equestrian, and then farming. Some ag preservation in that, but allowing for the farming to kind of grow and develop, not just large farming, but coming down to more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Hobby farms?
Yeah, hobby, I don't like that term because it sounds like people are just playing around, but they're not
That's
playing.
what they are doing though. It's
Well,
not.
some of them are. So this is actually, they
Never
actually
been
take
farmed
5
before.
acres and turn it into their livelihood, but that's what I would say. So a third of what's left above the parkway I'd like to see regional sports park, honestly. I think that would be really good for the.
So again,
I'm not saying where, that's your.
I don't wanna, this isn't to be an argumentative or anything, but to talk higher level, rather than even saying a third, saying we want something like parks and trails, we want hobby farms, or we want agricultural food production. I think that's maybe the, like
Keep it outside,
Bill
keep it as high as you
mentioned,
can.
trying to stay high level so that then we can start drilling down once we understand those bigger things.
So parks and trails, and then allowing for farming to grow and develop in the area.
I was just gonna say, I agree that we need to look at values and characteristics instead of just labels, because your interpretation of agriculture could be very different from my interpretation of agriculture.
Yeah.
What's missing is people on the west side who are currently in the business, who want to stay in the business, and I don't hear them at this meeting saying, hey, I want agriculture for this or that purpose, and I want to do it right here, or I want to do it south of the road going out to the airport, but I can't do it because I don't have water anymore.
Well, I think that's more of a kind of a city issue that, no offense, the council should take care of.
I'm a little confused. We're not talking about forcing any current landowner to change the behavior of their use of their land, are we? I mean, this is a master plan.
If we don't give them options, then they feel like they have to.
But this is a master plan. We can't force a farmer, I don't think we should, force a farmer to start farming. So to me, that's
Nor
almost
forcing
throwing.
somebody
That's
out
what
of
I was
farming.
saying.
We can't force somebody out of farming, so I don't want to throw out a red meat out there because I don't think we can force somebody out of farming. We can change the economic determination about whether their kids want to sell sooner or later. But I don't think we can necessarily force them out of business,
So
can
I'm
we?
saying allow for it to grow and develop, let them do what they're doing, but then allow for it to grow and develop.
If we don't give them options, real options to stay in the business, then we are forcing them out.
I think the market will determine a lot of that. Just this area it's a suburban area. It's really not rural. If we look at agriculture in southern Utah County, which is what I'm doing professionally, it's cherry farms and it's a giant dairy in Alberta. This is not something that actually contributes to the market. And if you were, I think, to take it to a real estate developer, they would say the highest and best use of that land is oftentimes homes where the water table permits, and I'm not saying we should force out farmers by any means, but I think that the market and private property rights will drive the development of that area more than our hope for pastoral lands.
Nor do I guess I'm hearing we don't want to force them to have to keep farming if they don't want to keep
Either
farming.
way, that's exactly
I want freedom either way.
But even talking about options at this point is dialing down. We're still trying to be higher level than that. The next question is the purpose for the ag preservation. Are we trying to produce food? Are we simply trying to have open space? Are we trying to have horse pastures? What purpose is ag preservation? We keep dialing down and
We got to stay high.
So why do we want these things, right?
Exactly.
Why do we want ag preservation? Why?
because
what
we know
is
why,
ag-
it helps
yeah.
us achieve
Right.
accomplishing that.
Why?
So isn't it, as I attend the meetings, it's sort of a quality of life for the way people live out there. Someone was saying, I don't want to live by a horse because they stink. I love living by horses. On Timpview Drive, there's one little half-acre pasture. Every mom brings her little kid and they feed the apple to the horse. And it really improves quality of life there.
But that's also a liability, right? I mean, there's pros and cons everywhere.
But it's the same thing for anywhere. You have a crack in your sidewalk that someone trips over and they can sue you for not taking care of your sidewalk.
Well, the city. you can't-
So taking what you just said, the high level, let's see if we can find out what a high level vision of what you just said is.
Quality of life.
So the agriculture for the quality of life, and I guess I'm trying, and I don't, so we're saying quality of life because we want open space, because we want the horse, what's the high level vision on
Well,
that?
it cuts down on traffic. You know, you have a horse living here, he doesn't drive a car.
And I'm not arguing against it, I'm just trying to go back to what I understand from the governance, trying to discern the high value of what that would be.
Okay. I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been driving around Provo. I've been looking at all of the apartment complexes going in, all the townhomes going in, the Plumtree Plaza, I mean, all the mixed use and everything going in. And I really think that Provo can be inclusive to everybody. You have areas of the city, you have the downtown area where some people love to live there because they like the traffic, they like the convenience of walking downstairs, they like that area. You've got the student areas and they like living there. And I think in Provo you can still have an area that is a little bit more rural for people and their quality of life, and we don't have to build it all up, and we can have these different areas in the city that everybody can feel included in the city. And that's why I think the ag preservation is key to the west side, because this is an area for people to stay and feel included in the city.
So the high level value there would be to provide variety,
Yes.
right?
Variety and
Okay.
quality of life is what I would say.
Did the response to these questions from Don Jarvis and the Agricultural Commission get sent out to all the?
Yeah.
Okay, so that didn't resonate, he didn't answer any questions?
My point is actually not even trying to express an opinion on all of these. I'm trying to find out where the higher value of all of this, so I can understand other opinions better. I loved growing up next to orange orchards. I love them. I get all that. I'm just trying to, I'm not trying to be difficult, I'm just trying to get us to a higher level of planning so that there's a value that then we can say, okay, then we have these choices here to go on it. Bill, you got?
Yeah, and I'm just trying to clarify what Don meant. Don talked about ag preservation, and he gave Central Park in New York as an example. To me, those are two very different attempts at maintaining open space. So let's define what that is. What does open space mean to you? You started to hit on it when you talked about parks and trails in addition to ag uses. That's good. That's the kind of feedback we need. What do you mean by open space? Is it just being able to grow crops and pasture animals, or is it more than that? That's the kind of high-level direction.
The question that I'm even asking on ag use, is it ag use that I can observe from a distance, or is it ag use that I get to walk a path through with a horse or walking trail through? And I'm thinking of the Wheeler Farms in my mind versus the horse trails in part of Southern California. I don't even have an opinion yet. I'm just trying to understand the other opinions here. And I'm not sure there are. I'm not sure I don't think they're unified, but I think we can start maybe finding some higher level that we all share an agreement up here.
Just a couple thoughts on what's been expressed. how to approach this.
Very humbly.
Well, and I'm torn as well a little bit with, I agree we need to keep things very high level, but we also need to, when we start talking about some of these principles, these decisions have consequences, a little bit as was expressed with, we may want a grocery store, but we can't force a grocery store to be there. All we can do is create the circumstances that a grocery store owner would want to place a grocery store there. And so one thought is with land use and diversity, I think we need to understand that Provo is just a piece of the greater community in the county. And so when we're looking for diversity, diversity for Provo might be, large tracts of suburban land, because that's not how the rest of the city has built up. But if you look countywide, that'd be fairly redundant. And so there may be things, large pastoral land may make more sense in other parts of the county. Because, and I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying it may be. And one of the things we need to consider is, we talk about the lifestyle of the people that are already there, but these decisions are going to not only affect who's currently there, but who will be able to live there in the future. We very easily, in city planning, particularly in the West, people often point to Boulder, of like, hey, look at the great things that they're doing there. I think they restrict their growth to no more than 3% a year. There's these choices that they've made, and a lot of people will point to Boulder as an example, but the median price, the price of a median home in Boulder is over $1 million. And if we need to understand that some of these policy decisions that we make are going to affect who lives there in the future. I mean, it may make some of the current residents, in the future, we may not have the same type of people that we're trying to protect that way of life, so.
Great
Mind
point.
if I address that really quick?
Sure.
Provo, the reason why, I know you, pushing large pastoral lands outside of Provo, I've heard that a lot. And the reason why I want to address this is because there are qualities about Provo City and living within Provo City that people want. The schools, the Provo Power Company. I mean, there's stuff about this city that you're not going to get in Springfield. You're not going to get in Nephi. You're not going to get in other cities. It's here in Provo, and that's what people want. And that's why I'm saying having different areas in the city where people feel included in the city, I think that's important to have. And you have, maybe not half, but you do have a percentage of people that want to live in an area like this. And you're not going to find that anywhere else in Provo. It's only on the west side at this point. And so looking to the future, I know there's compromises that have to be made for that. And that's okay. But we can still preserve a lot of this, build it smartly, or leave it to the farmers to decide how they want to do it, and still look for the population coming in the future. Like you said, it's a trade-off. It's like the transects that you sent out. We can have that rule and have some of the larger populated areas, but still keep the feel of the area. I don't think it has to be pushed out of Provo.
And so maybe the feel is kind of the high level policy that we're looking for. We do have some, what I would consider fairly productive agricultural land in Provo, and some other that may not be well used. And we have what they call it, the Fall Festival that the McCords put on every fall, and it's been great for the community. It's been great for their business, and it's something that they want to continue. And so I think that's a rural experience that people get to walk through and whatnot. So I think we may be able to find ways to provide opportunities for people who want to live in Provo. That's great. We can provide some of those opportunities without necessarily losing our quality of life and without losing that feel. And so maybe that should be the objective, is how do we keep the feel while still providing opportunities for people to
So we talk about who lives there now and who's going to live there in the future. But again, I come back to the farmers that are currently farming. And if you go and ask those that are still in the business if they feel supported or threatened, I think the answer would be threatened. That their livelihood is not being supported or advocated. And so our policy here is going to send a message to them that we are going to either help you stay in business or not. And we're going to supply mechanisms like transferring development credits that will allow them to stay in business and still allow the density on the west side that we need.
I think that's ultimately the question you've got, is that everything we put up there, even at a high level, involves the future of trade-offs. One of those is that if you want to preserve ag, you've got to create an incentive to allow them to get the value that they might otherwise get through developing the land.
Right.
Is that a high, sorry, I'm choking here. Is that a high enough level answer to put up on your board?
No, that's dialing down again. You're talking about a mechanism to accomplish something we haven't even defined yet, that we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, that's why I'm asking the question.
So I added this in here. So this bullet point of drafting a plan includes things like talking to homeowners after you're trying to figure out how to get a policy to actually work. But you have to know what policy you're trying to.
Okay, so what you're saying to us is, here's an area you want us to look at, ag preservation, yes or no? Generally, it sounds like there's some favorable to it. The question of how to get there is
That's all part of the planning.
Right, okay.
If I can, I think a further refinement, and again, we're jumping all over, because ag preservation, I think, like we mentioned earlier, is such a broad area. What does that mean? McCord's, I love nurseries, but that is not providing subsistence for food. I mean, those are trees and bushes, and you can buy strawberries and veggies for your yard, but that's not a food production. Yeah, I mean, what are we focusing on? Why ag preservation? Is it to provide food for farmers markets locally? Is it sell for families? Is it if you were really into full production, small farms doesn't make sense. You go big and you go intensive. And, big corporations coming in. If you're going for maximum production.
I haven't bought much hay at the farmer's market.
No.
So, I would tell you that for me, I don't care whether it's agriculture or how you want to classify it. A nursery in a community near me, to me, whether it's open space or however you classify it, I like it. If you ask me about it, I'd say, yeah.
I'd love to have gone in the nursery.
Make it possible.
It would have been a dream job.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, that's a perfect example of why we're asking question number 2 is if this can be answered, we can start drafting a plan to get us there. But if it's open-ended as we want ag preservation, but we don't know if that's sustainable food production for emergency preparedness, or whether it's equestrian trails, the way that you get to those two things are very, very different. And so it's, to be honest with you, it's literally impossible to come up with a plan without knowing what the target is that you're trying to plan for.
So for ag preservation, rural atmosphere.
That's what I've heard so far. So the bullet points I put down here are just what I'm hearing.
Right. Food production.
That's not locking the committee into anything until you as a committee decide what that's actually going to be.
Farmer's market? I mean, local.
What is farmer's market? I don't understand that.
It's locally grown.
Is it just something that I can have 4 or 5 trees, pick the cherries and turn it in? Or
And
does
go
it
stand at a booth and sell them?
stand at a booth and sell them? Or is it something that I'm really, so that sounds like a hobby to me.
Well, I think it's more like micro farms. I don't think.
There's
What's a micro farm? I don't understand what a micro farm is.
a small scale farm. So
Which is
I,
what
I,
farm that
I
is
know if you're
able to
looking
make
to
money.
make millions of dollars, yes, you do big conglomerate farms. But there are people who have 2 or 3 goats that sell the goat's milk to people who can't drink cow's milk, and it's a local produce given to local people. I mean, it's not
So
necessarily.
microfarm would be food production beyond the needs of your family. You'd have enough
Yes.
access to take it to the.
But on a hobby level, because you're not doing that to sustain your lifestyle.
I know
That's right,
people
that's
do
not,
do it
that's right.
that
It's
way.
not your vocation.
Right, and is anyone out there farming to sustain their lifestyle?
Well, right now there's cattle out there, so they're
But
farming to
that's-
sustain the cattle.
That's not a dairy business.
That's
it's
not a dairy business, and that's not ranching either.
I'd love to buy one of those cows to have in my freezer.
But that's a hobby, and that becomes more hobby.
But that's
You
their
don't
life,
pay cow.
though.
We have a
That's
conversation.
their
wanted to
life.
say
But
that
it's
some
not
of
making a
those
living.
farmers
Give-
down there.
give-
They are.
we don't have
Let's all hold
access
on,
to
hold on
water.
just for a minute. Just for a minute, sorry, we have a couple different conversations. We have a comment. Can you give us your?
I was just gonna say, some of those farmers you're talking about down there, the water has been taken away from them. You can't grow anything.
Okay,
So they want to develop.
so how is it, I don't think we can talk about that right now. I just, heads up, we have about a 2-minute warning before we need to start wrapping up. Is there,
That's a key point, though.
can we look into that? Who would we look to in the city to look into that? I'm curious, like, how was the water taken away? Were the rights taken away? Were there ever rights there?
Water rights are
What does
controlled at a
that-
state level,
So
so
the
that's
s-
probably a state level issue unless,
And I don't know that you can take water rights away if a person has them. I mean, if
They're
they're not
sold.
developed, yeah,
These
they're
are
sold.
rights with Provo City. These weren't our personal rights. We bought them. That's how we got the water. We bought it.
So Provo City was just no longer willing to sell to you? Is that what you mean by the
They
water
were
was
leasing
taken
you
away?
the rights and they
And
reclaimed
they
it.
took away the water, so you can't.
Yeah, I can tell you in the Salt Lake Valley, on occasion, some of the canal companies will cease selling water rights to individual property owners for whatever reason. They may find it's easier, they may make more money selling those water rights to somebody else.
Transferring them to a development.
Or leasing them, I should say. Leasing them.
In the case of Provo City owned irrigation water, which it leased to property owners throughout the city on an annual basis. About a decade, 10, 15 years ago, that started becoming very cost prohibitive for the city to do, and there were other demands for the water for municipal use. So the city has phased out of delivering and leasing that irrigation water to property owners throughout the community. There's a small number that still receive it, but most of that city-owned and operated irrigation system has been phased out. But it was city-owned water. The water rights were never owned by the individual property owners.
Okay, so that's helpful. So it sounds to me when we're making some of these decisions, we may, if the city's policy is to continue some agricultural production, we're gonna need to work with other, make sure that that's possible, that we work with the other departments in the city, that we make it feasible, if that's the decision that we need.
That's
that we
certainly the
choose.
kind of stuff you would flesh out in the plan
Yeah.
once the policy was determined.
But those are also things that are important to understand, because all of these policies have costs and benefits to them, and so we need to understand these costs and benefits when we start making some of these policies.
It sounds to me, if I can move it along, it sounds to me under number 2 then, whether you call it a hobby farm or other kind of farm, that there seems to be a general level of support for the concept of having some farming out there if property owners want to do it. Does that
but
seem
not
fair?
compelling them to.
That's the part where I'm confused, is
We're making the assumption that people are going to buy and they're going to farm and they can't afford that and they will sell it at the farmer's market, which is an assumption.
Well, I think the question here at the high level is there an interest in having that? And if so, the lower questions are, how do we make that possible? But I'm hearing hobby farm, I'm hearing food production. At the end of the day, at the end of the process, 5 years from now, tomorrow, some farmer's gonna look at it economically and say, I either want to preserve this, so I sell my rights so I can keep farming, or I'm gonna say, I want to cash out, I want my money, or they'll just continue doing what they're doing. The question for us, for this committee is, is that something we want to encourage? It sounds to me like there's a fair number of people here that want to at least explore making it possible. And there's some who are saying, why bother? And there's some who are saying, yeah, we want it. So I think you can say realistically that if I were summarizing the discussion I've heard, is that there is general support for the concept. Further down in the decision-making process that you have as policymaking is, will be how do you get there? And we may discover along the way that we can't get there, or you may discover that it's the easiest thing to get there.
Okay. Sure. 10 seconds.
Yeah, so I think the fact that we actually have a brand-new agricultural commission here in Provo makes a statement that this is important. And I would just say that if somehow we're all getting it wrong, that everyone on the west side is delusional and agriculture is totally meaningless and ought to be in Payson or somewhere, if we get it wrong, then, and no one wants to farm it, and it's just, it's just wasted space somehow. You can always develop it later, but once you develop it, you can't go back.
So it is now 6:29. Today is the 29th of November. 2 weeks from today is the 13th of December. And that's a non-council week. So that's our next scheduled meeting. I don't believe we have any presentations scheduled.
No, we can continue this kind of discussion.
To me, as a participant, finding the commonality out here first sure makes it a lot easier. I get really confused down here in the middle. I really like it if we can kind of stay out here and then slowly move our way down. And process-wise, starting out high and big picture vision sure seems more effective, and I actually a chance to listen to the residents, what they really want.
Okay, so thank you. So we will continue this discussion. It might feel a little awkward or whatever, but I think this is the heart and the meat of what we've been asked to do here. So,
Quick question, very quick.
yes.
If residents still want to comment, how should they go about that?
There'll be other opportunities. Right now, we just did that as a preliminary. At some point, this committee will want to take some of its recommendations and go to the stakeholders and get further input. And then further down that list, there'll be more formal processes both at the council and the planning commission and perhaps some others. So that was just...
In the meantime, a letter to their council person or...
Sure. I mean, and the thing that we had online was really to try to just start the conversation so you guys had a sense of what some of your neighbors are saying.
When did we hear that?
We just emailed that to you today, tonight.
But,
We thought we'd already done it, but I sent it out during the meeting.
So got out to the council but not to the committee. We apologize for that. So 2 weeks from today, we'll meet back here. Please take a picture of that. Well, if we can email those 4 questions as written that way. Think about it. Think about all of the presentations that we've been given, and we'll continue this conversation in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone. I will look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Great. All in favor? Any opposed? All right. We have lots of abstainings, but we will adjourn. Thank you.
I think everybody's already walking out the door.
I'll email that to you.
And Vicki looked at them, and she was the first one to look to see to us that there were a lot of people not fill those out. That little girl on the inside of that.